Well, hello there, studio teacher friends. Welcome to the Beyond Measure podcast with me, Christina Whitlock. I am your host, as well as your self appointed anytime piano teacher friend. Today's episode features a conversation I am so excited to share with you. If you have been out of the loop, this summer I am hosting actual conversations here on the podcast with some of my teacher friends. Actually, I am hosting double conversations with each of my guests, one chat that you'll hear here in just 1 minute on the podcast, and a second conversation that is being posted to the Patreon community. If you want more from today's discussion, Patreon membership is very affordable. Joining the Patreon community helps support the many moving parts behind this podcast. So, to those of you who are already members of the Patreon, thank you for helping me keep the lights on over here at Beyond Measure Podcast. Everyone else, I'd strongly encourage you to check it out at ChristinaWhitlock.com/Patreon. That's ChristinaWhitlock.com/Patreon. Thanks in advance for all of your support. So let's move on now, shall we? I've got a great guest joining me today. You are listening to the Summertime Conversation Series here on the Beyond Measure podcast. Janna Williamson, my friend Janna, welcome to the Beyond Measure podcast.
It is so fun to be here. Thank you for having me.
I feel like I just need to share with everyone that every time you text me or some kind of message from you rolls through my phone, my 13-year-old goes, "It's Janna."
Aww.
So I just want to say, it's Janna.
Well, I've had the pleasure of meeting your 13-year-old in person, so she's delightful.
Thank you. I think so. So I always say that you are my favorite Instagram find. You're my favorite thing I ever found on Instagram, Janna. You posted a video a few years ago of yourself playing Beethoven Opus 109, which is like my favorite piece in the whole wide world. And we just kind of struck up a conversation there. And, you know, Stephen King, I've heard him say something about how like big life changes swing on small hinges. And I always feel like that was a small hinge. I just remember thinking, I'm going to tell this lady she's really good at playing 109. And ta-da, there it came. And I don't know if you had already listened to the podcast or if that's what made you start listening to the podcast. I have no idea.
I think I had already started listening, and I would just say that your podcast is one of my favorite things I've found online. I don't think I found that on Instagram, so I can't do that specifically, but our friendship that we've struck up because I found your podcast and because every time I listened to it, I was agreeing with 99.9% of everything that you said and shouting amen in my car or in my kitchen as I was listening.
I should say that I think one of our only points of disagreements that we've come up with is the fact that you think my recitals are too long and you like short recitals. And I cannot for the life of me split my recitals into multiple groups because we're just too happy of a family. So anyway.
Well, do you want to know what I said to my husband last week? I said, I might try one recital next year. So, you know, the world might be ending, but there you have it.
You guys have no idea what a big deal that is. Never be afraid to change, guys. We all have things that work until they don't. And sometimes it's worth it to try. There's lesson number 1 from today's episode. But you know that we're kind of revisiting previous episodes this summer. And when I watch the metrics on my podcast, some of the most consistent episodes that stay in the top 10 downloaded episodes of all time is this series of podcasts that I released on helping prepare our students for performance. And that is something that clearly resonates with the audience of this podcast. And I think you obviously agree because you have created a very successful online course called Preparing Confident Performers. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts as to why that is a topic that resonates so much in this community and just why it's so important in general to make sure we're addressing this concern of helping our students perform more confidently.
So, as far as why performance in general is very important, I think there are a whole host of reasons. I'm just going to start with a story that I told on my Instagram this week because it's so perfect for this. I had a student who is now 21. I believe he stopped after freshman year of high school, so that's been 6 years ago at this point. But I taught all three of the kids in the family and got to be friends with the parents. And so I still am in touch with them. And the mom texted me this week and said, he was taking the LSAT this week because he's pre-law, and he was a complete bundle of nerves. And this is a very talkative kid, a very like verbal processor, just a great kid, great family. And in the process, he's going through how nervous he is, talking to his mom, and then says, but I know I can do this. I know I'm going to perform well. Miss Janna and piano taught me how to do that.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so there is this like long-term teaching kids, teenagers how to perform does teach life skills, and there's hardly any careers or academic paths that don't require some sort of performance, whether it has anything to do with music or not. And so I do think just teaching our students how to prepare, how to have confidence in themselves that they have prepared and they can do this in the moment, and then actually like get up and do it. It takes a lot of bravery and a lot of chutzpah to get up there and do it. But by doing that repeatedly over the course of a long period of time, they can have that understanding in their head that they can do it and then apply it to other things, such as taking the LSAT, which frankly would have made me very nervous.
I notice this with my student athletes. I always think there's a lot of correspondence between my students who perform well athletically and those who perform well on the concert stage. And it's because they understand how their body feels under pressure, and they learn through lots of experience how to get out there and keep their wits about them under scrutiny. And so I think that all ties right in together.
It does. On a much more philosophical level, we have to remember that we are training musicians and that music is an art that occurs in real time. I mean, we live in the age of recordings, but back in the day, unless someone sat down and played something for you, you couldn't even experience it, period. So I always say to my students over and over again, music is for sharing, that it's our gift to give to other people, to give them that experience of something beautiful, something exciting, whatever the type of piece is, we're giving that gift. And so if we get too tied up in not remembering that it is something that is to be shared, whether it's vastly public or just with your family, then we're missing the mark on that as well. So that's one of the other reasons it's important. And from a very practical standpoint, performances show our parents in the studio the return on their investment. And as much as I don't want studio recitals to just be about, well, let's clock the progression this year, that is a real part of it. And hopefully we can frame it as a celebration of what has been accomplished this year and how so-and-so has grown and improved. And then those performances are great marketing because everyone comes out of a good performance thinking, Miss Janna is a great teacher, and I want to tell my neighbor who was just asking about piano lessons that I know a great one, and her students all played so beautifully, and it was, all of that. So those are some very practical reasons, along with the music is for sharing, the more esoteric and philosophical part of it. It all comes together and is very important in my mind.
Yeah, it's one of those things that so many things are true at once,
Yes.
right? So, the beauty of the sharing matters, the reputable nature of your studio matters, the investment and compelling parents to continue to invest. That's something that does matter. One of the biggest compliments I've always remembered in my heart is several years ago, I had a parent in my studio, and I think it was maybe the second or third recital she had attended of mine. And she called me the next day and she said, just confirm for me, that's not normal, right? Like, those aren't normal studio recitals, right? Yours have to be like completely exceptional. She's like, most studios don't have students playing that well, do they? And I just thought that was so sweet. And I wanted to say, no, it's not that exceptional. However, it was nice to hear that from a parent standpoint. And everybody knows this, that I let my elementary students just really swim in their concepts for a while. And I'm not super worried about progressing them through levels quickly in those first few years. Parents will often say, oh, my kid's never going to be that kid at the end of the recital, or they're never going to be playing that stuff. And then it's like, a switch flips, and all of a sudden they'll come to me after the recital and say, oh, they are doing it. My kid is playing that stuff. I can't believe it. When did that happen? And I just love that so much.
Well, and to go along with that, I think one of the passion points that led me to create my course and talk about this a lot is that I think elementary level and early intermediate students should be playing their repertoire in performance as artistically
Yes.
as the high schooler who's playing a Beethoven sonata. And we can teach them to do that, to really perform with poise and flair and excitement. And then, yes, parents enjoy everything on the program as opposed to just the couple of superstar students, but even the student playing the Easy Girlet piece and the Martha Muir jazz number or whatever is just as enjoyable, albeit at a easier level and simpler musically. It's still as enjoyable and fun.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we look at your course and how many teachers have been so satisfied with the things that you've taught them in that course. And I can't help but think that one of the reasons there's just such a need for this is that we all know we kind of teach the way we were taught. And I don't know, when I look back on my training, it wasn't really until probably my senior year of high school or into college that I really started to learn how to perform well and how to memorize properly and how to do all these things. And so I think that you're really filling a crucial gap for us that a lot of us did not receive. And so we just don't have that perspective on how to teach performance specifically. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally. I would completely agree. And everything should be done in an age appropriate manner. So I'm not talking with 7-year-olds about performance anxiety because that's not psychologically where they're at. And when you have very easy repertoire, you don't need intense memorization skills, but everything should be done methodically. And once they start encountering things that are more difficult to play under pressure, memorized, or when they hit adolescence and they suddenly become very self-conscious, that's when we start to address these things in a, like I said, age appropriate manner and have a lot of tools for those different levels.
So speaking of your tools, I'm very curious. I'm going to put you on the spot here. But if you had to make a list of like the top 5 reasons that students do not perform to our expectations, what would be on your list?
Oh, I've got this list. Don't worry. You're not putting me on the
good.
spot.
So let's do this. Then since you have it, let's start at number 5 and like work our way to number 1.
Okay.
You want to? It'll be so fun.
Okay, so number 5 would be there wasn't enough time. And that can be on either the student or the teacher. Like the student just totally procrastinated and didn't realize. And I have had teenagers in the past who are good students who for some reason suddenly forget how much time it actually takes to prepare. So that sometimes is on them, but more frequently, I think for less experienced teachers, this is on the teacher. Either their way of choosing recital repertoire is not as efficient and productive as it could be, or they just don't realize how long it takes for a student to feel totally secure and be ready to play.
I've admitted it many times because I know that that was one of my big teacher flaws for a long time. Like my students would have, for instance, maybe a festival in the early spring, and then some of my students would go on to a more advanced kind of serious competition, and they needed pieces from multiple time periods. And I know in my early days of living here, I absolutely sent students in with their Baroque pieces, mind you. Having just kind of tried to learn them between the first festival and that event, which is just so cringy on my part. And I think I recently confessed to you that I've turned students off of like Bach conventions and things because we were trying to learn them in a couple of weeks. That is not good, everyone.
It's actually one of my tips in the course is specifically with Baroque repertoire to start that earlier and even maybe give it some time off and then bring it back out for an important performance like a required required festival or whatever. That just takes more time. So yeah, one of the things I've done in consults is talk about what is an actual timeline like, and it's different for different age groups and levels and all of that, but that's something that comes with time and teaching. You start to
Of
realize how
course.
long it really does take. And then individual students who need longer than others, of course, too.
Mhm. I do think it's really helpful, though, for teachers to think about it like right now, like if you're listening to this
Yeah.
episode in real time, because at some point in the next few weeks, if you haven't done it already, you're going to start thinking about your studio calendar for the year.
Yes.
And in addition to planning your events, I put reminders in my phone, I put reminders in my calendar so that I know when I'm going to send out the emails. And I make sure that that parent, student, teacher triangle is all in the loop in terms of when their pieces need to be memorized, when they need to have them
Yep.
selected, or whatever. And I think that's a really important step. So
Absolutely.
this is very
Absolutely.
timely, everyone.
It always is. We should always be thinking about it. Okay, that was number 5. Number 4 was that the piece was too difficult for the
Mhm.
student. And I do unfortunately hear this a lot in either adjudications or other things. A student starts playing the pathetique, and I know within 15 seconds they're just not ready for that. Or a musically mature piece, maybe not as technically mature, but slow Chopin or something like that, that I'm just thinking to myself, they just haven't had enough experience. So, along with that, with it being too hard musically, sometimes it's just a technical issue that there's one particular thing in a piece technically that the teacher and the student haven't solved. So, that again is on us, right? That is also a skill that comes with time and teaching, of realizing what makes different pieces difficult, what student can handle, what experiences have they had? Are they set up to be able to play? Or is this just too hard for them right now? And keeping in mind, if your student wants to play something difficult, sometimes they do just need to hack away at something that's above their level and let them do that, but don't let them program it then. And that's also really difficult and takes personal nuance, communication skills. But I don't have any problem with saying to a student, yeah, absolutely, we can work on this. I just want you to know, I don't think this is going to be something you can play on the May recital, given when we're starting it and where you are right now. So,
Yeah, I have that conversation with students a lot when they bring me the top hits, and they'll be like, "Well, I want
yes,
to work on Moonlight Sonata this year." I'm like, "Well, that's fine, but it's not going to events,
right.
whether they can
Right.
play it or not. Like that is not going to be your competition piece this year." And
Right.
it just takes time and nuance with the relationship and being able to communicate that. But I've learned to say that up front. Sometimes it's great for students to work on those pieces that are going to stretch them. It's motivating and it gives you some real context to tackle some bigger
Yeah.
technique, which is
Yeah.
great. But yes, keep putting that caveat that
It's not just about me. It's not just about you can't walk
right.
out of my studio playing this piece that you don't play very well. It's also about them. Like if I let them walk out of the studio playing the third movement of the Moonlight under pressure, it's not going to go well. And that again is then going to give them a negative feeling about performing. And it's like a vicious cycle. Okay. Number 3, the student didn't go beyond learning the notes or have any kind of expressive, imaginative connection to the piece. So they're not playing stylistically, they're just kind of going through the motions. And if I can step on one of my soapboxes for just a moment,
Sure.
this happens a lot with Baroque music where students treat Bach or something else like a finger exercise. And that's just not really fun for anybody involved in the performance.
I love that. Not fun for anyone.
No, it's really not. It's not pretty. Okay, number 2, the student was too wrapped up mentally in doing things right and
Mm,
or in not making any mistakes, and that they actually didn't make any music. So this is more about mindset than it is about performance. I do think a lot of our students walk into a performance thinking there are people sitting there counting their mistakes, which
oh,
is
yes.
absolutely not true. Nobody is doing that. And I remind everybody, hardly anyone in a pre-college situation is going into something political or so competitive that there's somebody in the room that doesn't want you to do well. I know that
Right.
exists on a higher level, but that is not true in my studio ever. Even if my students go into a competition or an evaluative event, The judges sitting there want them to play well. I always want every student who walks into anything that I evaluate to play well. I want to hear great music and tell them all the great things that they did, not figure out how to fix their problems. So, all that to say, yes, I always remind them nobody is sitting here counting your mistakes. They want to enjoy the music that you are sharing, the gift that you are giving in playing this exciting piece. And so we talk a lot about, on a very practical level, what is great about this piece? What's exciting about it? What's beautiful about it? What is memorable about it? And then also going to the next level, particularly with your precocious, imaginative students, can you come up with a story that this piece is telling? Or do you have an image, a picture in your mind? Or my favorite way to phrase this is, if this were the score to a film, what would be happening in this scene? Because sometimes students get too caught up in, what are you feeling right now? Because they might not be feeling anything related to what this piece says. But instead, if it's the film score, then who's in the scene? What's the setting? How light is the lighting, or how dark is it? And what's happening? And that can be a much more, outside of themselves and yet imaginative exercise. And you can get some really fun answers. And I will often say, that's not what I was imagining, but I really like it. Let's go with it.
Yeah, I love that point about the storyline as opposed to the feelings, because I think a lot of us do default to, oh, how do you want to make your listener feel? Or how do you feel? And you're right, they're feeling any number of things. And I love that idea of focusing on the story and the plot line. I had a student many, many, many years ago who was playing the Burgmuller Ballade. And she came in and she had this whole storyline plotted out for me. And she even said the title Ballade. She said, I've decided that stands for Big Animal Likes Living at Dude's Estate. And so she had this whole plot line of how, like, this almost like a Scarbo kind of thing, where like this animal is like tormenting this homeowner at night in that, the opening minor section. And then they start dancing together in the middle, that lighthearted like B section, and it's more beautiful. And so they're getting along. And then they go back to tormenting one another, I guess, at the end when the A theme returns. But it will always forever to me be Big Animal Likes Living at Dude's Estate. But I love that, right? So I can't not play that storyline when I hear that piece.
The Burgmuller Ballade is the quintessential piece to write a story with. And it's the one piece that actually requires students to come up with a story.
Really?
Because I explained that a ballade is a dramatic musical story, and so they really have to. Like, that's just what it is. So I have multiple stories that come to my mind when you say that piece at this point. Okay, my number one reason that students might not perform at our expectations for them is that they didn't practice performing. And we always have to have in our heads that practicing, rehearsing, working through things, and practicing performing are two different things. And we know students fall into the default of they're, quote unquote, practicing and they just play through. But students also fall into the default of allowing themselves to stop and fix things when they're in the practice room. And so there's lots of collective wisdom about how to pretend like you're performing, such as the most obvious is just record yourself, or ask a family member or friend to come in and sit there and listen to you, to kind of recreate what will actually happen when you are in front of an audience. I hope my students never walk into a recital or evaluative event having not multiple times in multiple contexts practice performing, whether it's for me in the lesson, for their parents, on a recording, for somebody else in the studio. There's a lot of ways to do that. And I don't ever want them walking out without that experience of doing it multiple times.
Yeah, we have kind of a low-key performance event that a lot of my students will do here at the end of January. And so we'll always use a piece they're going to play later that spring for one of their evaluative events. Right. And it's so great because every single person that participates in that January event always comes out ahead in March, because there's something about getting that first really big performance out of the way. But exactly what you're saying, on a smaller scale, to continue leading up to that, it just really matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just have to underscore something you said in your second point too, because I think you and I have the exact same speech that we give our students, and I didn't realize it. I can't tell you how many times a year I say, no one is keeping tally marks on the number of mistakes you make. I say this all the time. And you're
Yes.
so right that as we perform, and I'm so guilty of this myself, we do kind of keep the tally list, right? We think, oh,
Yep.
that wasn't great. And those start to wear you down. And actually, no one in a live experience is approaching it that way or even feeling that. There's
No,
so
and
much forgiveness in the live performance that we don't get when we listen back to our recordings and things.
yeah.
There's that thrill of live performance.
And my favorite performances are ones that can recall feeling the energy from the audience and knowing that everybody there loved me and was there because they wanted to hear me play the piano. And so I can remember that feeling of, okay, we're all in this together right now to experience this music, for me to share what I've curated for you in this program. And that's just a wonderful moment of human connection, not me worrying about what they're thinking of me.
Right. Right. I've been saying all year, it's just the ultimate practice of authenticity, right? It's
Yes.
here,
Yes.
here I am. This is the offering I have. This is the musician I am today.
Yep.
And, let's go on this journey together. Your students are so fortunate.
Yours too, if you're saying the same thing.
So tell everybody where we can find you online these days and what you're up to.
Yes, my website is just simply my name, jannawilliamson.com, and Janna has two N's in it, so Janna Williamson. And then my YouTube channel is also just under my name. A lot of my YouTube content is individual pieces, primarily from the intermediate repertoire, although I do have some late elementary and early advanced as well. So I will take one piece and in the course of 10 to 15 minutes, go through several teaching tips. Because I have taught all these pieces many, many times, I know what are the current student pitfalls, and I'm hoping to save you some time if you have not taught this piece multiple times, and also draw teachers' attention to what are the main teaching points here? What can this piece be a vehicle for learning in the learning process, as well as, since I already mentioned, I'm quite passionate about historical repertoire, talking through some of the stylistic concerns, particularly around Bach and Baroque music or classical music in general. And I am not an early music expert. I am just passionate about this topic, and I have done a lot of self-study in it. And I really do like the process of whittling that down to concepts that students, even adolescents and teenagers can understand, that can help them play better, play more expressively, and like their historical music even better, not out of a spirit of this is how you have to play this, but this is how you can really engage with this and enjoy playing it. So that's what I'm doing over on YouTube. I do have the course and several other resources on my website, from free to cheap to more expensive. So jannawilliamson.com, and all the resources are /resources if you want to go straight there.
Excellent. We'll share all those in the show notes. But I loved so much of how you just described your YouTube channel, and it just plays right back into our conversation, because I know you and I both believe that students do not spend enough time in the intermediate repertoire. As
Yes.
teachers, it's really easy to get excited because our students have some facility and some expressive range, and we have a tendency to boot them into that advanced repertoire too soon. So if you feel like that was your experience, as many of us do, then you have provided us a real wealth of exposure to that intermediate repertoire. So if you don't subscribe to the YouTube channel, I would absolutely make sure you find Janna Williamson on YouTube. Okay, so here's our big final question. This is big time, Janna. Tell me something that you love beyond measure, but no serious answers allowed.
I am such a sucker for beautiful things, which is why I live in a 1903 house that has all kinds of issues. So I was thinking about this question, thinking, what beautiful thing am I going to mention? I think right now, my little Japanese spirea out in the side of my house are blooming with beautiful pink flowers. They're actually these great little plants. When the stalks come up, the leaves are red and then they turn green and then they bloom pink flowers. So that's my current. I'm not a great gardener. Those are super low maintenance plants that my dad
That's what I
recommended.
need.
Anything in the generally beautiful, I can just walk by it every time I go outside and say, "Aren't those so cute?" And
Oh,
then,
I love
yeah.
that. Visual, what do we call that? Like dopamine decor, they're talking
Yes,
about these days a lot, right? Like surround
yes.
yourself with beautiful things and you will feel better.
It really does matter. And that's why I have a house with stained glass windows and lots of woodwork and all that.
That's incredible. Well, I'll tell you what, can you close us out today with a quick toast to the profession?
I would love to. Cheers to preparing our students to perform beautifully and confidently. May we help them know their self worth outside of their performance and
Mm.
help them prepare to play with security and joy.
Oh, here, here, Jana. Oh, we could talk all day long, and we're going to keep talking over in the Patreon for anyone who wants to have a little deep dive on what it means to really offer up leadership in your studio and to train up leaders in your studio. But for now, we'll say goodbye and thank Janna Williamson for joining us for today's conversation.
Thank you.
Oh, I love conversations with my friends. Thanks for listening today. You can find links to the original episode mentioned today, as well as information on how to join the Patreon community to get access to this summer's bonus conversations, all in the show notes for today's episode. Don't be a stranger, my friends. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Beyond Measure Podcast. I would love to hear from you and find out what you've been up to this summer. Until we meet again, friends, onward and upward.